Oh, what a beautiful day it was. I was just taking a little stroll and I was admiring the flowers and the mushrooms and just the beautiful day in general. When all of a sudden, I saw a little something waving at me. It was a little teeny guy, a little gnome. He caught my attention, so I went over. Of course, I was going to have a conversation with him. And wouldn't you know it, he was really into board games. So we struck up a conversation. I asked him about his favorite games, asked him if he'd been playing anything good recently. And he said, well, I actually have a game I think you should check out. It's called Gnome Hollow. He gave it to me. He said, give this one a try and you won't be sorry. Gave me a thumbs up, and I never saw him again. Gnome Hollow is a set collection, tile, worker placement game from the op, all about gnomes building out gardens of flowers and mushrooms. On your turn, you're going to be selecting tiles and placing them in order to build out mushroom rings. And the bigger the better, because then the more mushrooms they produce. Over the course of the game, you place your little gnome workers in order to claim areas and to collect mushrooms and flowers and to sell to the market. And at the end of the game, the person with the most victory points is the winner. Gnome Hollow is an excellent game. I'm going to cut right to the chase. I find the gameplay to be super approachable and easy to teach. Underneath the simple and approachable gameplay in and of itself, there are more difficult player boards, and an optional added trade market that you can include into the game to spice things up a little bit. But even the base game itself, it comes with tons of clever moments of thinkiness, whether it's trying to decide how big do I want to make this mushroom ring, or what signs to visit, or which mushrooms to bring to the market and sell. One of my favorite aspects of the game is the ever-shrinking mushroom selling options, because once a certain number of any particular mushroom has been sold, let's say like 4 red, then that particular number of said mushroom can never be sold again. Bit of option manipulation that makes every decision matter and makes for an interesting race to who can make the best sales first. I love that. On top of all that, history and components in this game are spectacular. I think the op continues to level up their game. From the organization system within the box to the player aids, look at these magnetic player boards. These pieces that just slide down. It's perfect. It's flawless. I could go like this all day. They're staying on the board. I love it. And even just down to the artwork that I would describe as wholesome and soothing. Overall, a great game in a great product that I would highly recommend. I do think this game is going to be an evergreen, and I don't think you should miss out on it now. All the praise it's been getting is well-deserved. There's been quite a bit of buzz about it, and I think it's going to be a highlight of games from 2024. As you can assume from all the praise that is heaped upon the game, I was very excited about this from when I first heard about it. For playing it, all of my expectations were met and exceeded. And this is the moment that I'm happy to tell you, is we got the privilege of connecting with the designer of Gnome Hollow himself, Ammon, where we took some time to chat about the design process of the game, the hobby in general, and more, as you'll see. So without further ado, let's check that out. Hi, Ammon. Welcome to Board Game Animal, and thank you for taking a few minutes to chat with us about Gnome Hollow.
Anytime. Let's do this.
A couple really good games right behind you too. Not to mention your own, which is also fantastic.
Nucleum. Love this.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I haven't got to play Nucleum yet. Played Wormspan a bit, but
Nucleum's awesome.
I have to try.
I just got the expansion, and
really?
I'm so excited to play this. And they have a new one coming out at Essen that I'm going to pick up at Essen, and I'm excited to play that one too. So, and then Toletum, great game.
Mm-hmm.
It got a lot of hate. I don't know why. I mean, there's a few problems with it from what I've seen, but
sure.
I think it's a pretty solid game actually. And then I just got Undergrove yesterday in the mail, and Elizabeth's my friend, so I thought we'll throw that back there.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, nice with the mushroom theme as well with Gnome Hollow, right?
Mm-hmm.
We seem to be in a bit of a trend right now because there's Mycelium, I believe, as well, and
yeah,
a couple others. Yeah.
Well, I promise I'm not making any more mushroom games. I'm done with that. Just expansions.
There you go. There you go. One of the other reasons I was excited for Gnome Hollow, I mean, at the beginning of the year, we got to partner with the op and we are going to do stuff for them. And they showed the teaser of it. And my family and I love gnomes. Like my friends and I and my family and I for years have done our own personal little comic. It's kind of like an RPG thing, but we don't play it. It's just storytelling.
Oh, really?
Narrative. Yep. And there's a lot of there's characters based on ourselves. And my wife is infamously short. And so one of the characters based on her is a gnome, and my kids love it. So for a long time now, they've been obsessed with gnomes. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, put that on our list. We definitely want to cover it. And then, you know, now that we got to play it,
Eh,
it's great. So,
oh, I'm glad. Yeah, it's so the base game's pretty light.
mhm.
Um, I mean, it's very accessible. Like you could play it with your family, like your kids, like it's like 8, you
Yeah.
could play it. But if you flip over and do the hard side and you add in the trade market, it gets pretty rough.
Yes, I know. I haven't got to do much with the trademark yet, but the backs of the boards, I love that. I love that.
It's so
The
much
complexity with the shapes, yeah.
it's so much harder. Actually, that's the original version of the game. So when I first developed it, it was that way. And like I took it places and people played it and they're like, this is so brain burning. Like this is way too hard. And so I made the simpler boards.
Hmm.
And that's what went really like mass. But then I wanted those harder boards in there and they kept them, which made me really happy.
Yeah, that's great. So we connected first when the op read one of our questions at a little Q&A with you at one of the
Yeah,
conventions,
that's right.
right? Yeah, and you heard Harry the board game animal, and someone tagged me in it because they were like, somebody said, "Oh, that Ammon answered your question." So I
It's
went
because
and
you had
looked.
such an
And
awesome name. Like I was like, dude, that's a great name.
thank you. I appreciate that. That was kind of a fun, random thing. I wanted to start making board game content a few years ago, and my kids got a big kick out of me doing silly, stupid voices for our pets, and I kind of just merged them. So our dog Harry is basically the mascot, and
Awesome.
the rest is history, you know. So
That's awesome. I mean,
thank you.
honestly, like that's the best way to like come up with a name or a concept, like is to just take things that are familiar. I think that's awesome.
No, thank you. So I actually wanted to revisit that for a second because that question that we had asked in that moment that you answered was, what had changed most from conception to the final product for Gnome Hollow. And I thought that was interesting. You said originally it was concentric circles or some element with
Yep.
the mushroom rings, right?
Yeah, originally like the whole core concept of the game was going to be the whole core concept of the game was going to be the idea of like building rings around rings, and the more rings you could combine together were the bigger the points.
Sure.
That ended up not being quite so fun. Like so it worked, but it was like I don't know. I've gone through like a pretty significant like change in how I approach game design through Gnome Hollow because it was actually like a long process. This game took a while, but the uh, the thing that I think that sticks out the most about it is like I learned that when I'm designing anything, I just keep having to ask myself like, is this fun?
Hmm.
And if it's not fun, then I don't want it in the game. And so like the other side effect to that coin, right? So like there's a two sides to everything. Is that what I think is fun and what other people think is fun is different.
Yeah.
So like somebody rated it a 3 today and said like he rated it a 3 and said it like it was like one of the like most inane like brain like AP things he's ever done. He will never play it again. And I'm like, that's okay. Not every game's for everybody.
Yeah. That must be a very challenging part of the design space because just like any hobby or any interest, people's tastes vary so strongly, and I know
Yeah.
with Board Game Geek, the opinions can be very strong, how they're delivered sometimes. But
Well, it's Board Game Geek is funny because like so if I go to like if I went right now to like a
mhm,
game night or a bar or someplace and I put that on a table and people played it, the vast majority of those people are like, "This is so awesome! I love this game. This is so much fun. This is one of the most fun games I've ever played." With Board Game Geek, people, and that includes myself,
sure.
um, we're a bit jaded, right?
Hmm.
We've been playing great games like for years, and so like it's the idea is like, is this new? Is there something new here? Like another new here, right? Like,
Right.
but the reality is that um after COVID and during COVID,
Hmm.
our entire market shifted. Like everything changed. A lot of people who are like hardcore hobbyists haven't figured this out, I don't think yet, or they play within like the game group they've always played in. But a lot of people stayed home and they stayed home with their families. And so they went out and found games that their families would play and they started introducing their families to games. Um, and they brought like a massive ton of people to the hobby.
Right.
But those people that came into the hobby in the last 3 to 4 years are not the people that are going to be playing Nucleum.
Mm-hmm.
They're never going to play that game. Like it's not even interesting. And so um a game like Gnome Hollow, when they've been playing the heck out of like Ticket to Ride and stuff like that, they're going to be like, this is so exciting. And that's really what we found like in playtesting everywhere. So I'm glad to put in like a lot of the more of the complicated stuff. And eventually I want to add a lot more complicated stuff to the game through expansion, right? But the initial release was intended to be accessible.
No, I think that's great because that's something that I've come to learn. A lot of my what's become my core game group over the past couple years. We have a few of us who are very heavy like hardcore in the hobby. And then we have quite a few
Yeah.
people who rotate out who are not. They're there to have a good time. They like trying new things
Yeah.
and checking these things out. And so we normally have to kind of gauge the evening, right? Not every game night is going to be the new biggest Garfield game with the expansions on it. It's not going to be
Yeah.
something like that. And the other thing that's funny to me sometimes in the hobby is when you see these reviews and things are skewed like, oh, it's not, nothing new. It's this and that. It's very light. I don't see what's wrong with that either. That's the funny part is because sometimes it's like, if it's not for you, I completely understand it, right? Like if you say, oh, it just didn't
Yeah.
for me, that's fine. But sometimes I'm like, kind of like with food, right? Sometimes we want a certain meal, a certain cuisine. The reason there's so much variety and what's beautiful about that is,
Yeah.
what are you in the mood for? And so I always say it's funny because I'm a bit of an Omni gamer myself, and it's
I like
humorous.
that.
It's humorous when I see some people like, oh, I don't like blank type of games or blank type of games because I like a little bit of everything. So if you looked at my like top 25 games, right, you're going to have some arguably light games according to BGG, and then you'll have some
Sure.
ridiculously heavy ones. And I'm like, no, it's a mood thing. And I think that's one of the things I liked about Gnome Hollow when I unboxed it for the first time. I'm looking at it, I'm like, this is super approachable looking. It's
Yeah.
approachable gameplay. It just has that very relaxing vibe. And then once I looked at some of the options, I looked at those back of the boards, I looked at some things, my wife and I were playing it, and I'm like, this is a very interesting game in disguise. And I think it
Yeah.
has it has that range just in that. So the fact that you have the expansion ideas in mind, that's really enticing. I like that.
Well, what's funny is so I go to conventions, right? And so I met those people who like play the spectrum of games. They're not,
Mhm.
and even me, like I can't play Nucleum every night. Like I
Right.
don't have that much time. I need something shorter, lighter to like kind of hit uh that sort of niche. But one of the things that we found, so like I would be at a convention and I'd have the game on the table. And so oftentimes like a woman who was with her husband or partner or whatever would
Hmm.
walk up and be like, "I'm interested in this one," and the husband would come over like, "Okay, okay," look. And you can just see him like looking over here and looking over there, like, "I want to look at like all the other games." Um, and then she'd get really excited and be like, she'd turn to her husband or her partner and be like, "I really want this game. Can we buy this game?"
Hmm.
And like almost universally, it went just like this. It said, "You would play this with me?" And then she would be like, I would totally play this with you. And they're like, can I buy this game? Like it was like this instant like shift, right?
Yeah.
Because it was something that interested their partner. And so like I think that audience is a big audience too of people like I know my wife like I couldn't pay her to just come and play Nucleum with me. I couldn't pay her to do it.
Hmm.
Like it wouldn't matter. I'd be like, hey, you want to go to Hawaii next week? They'd be like, what's in it for you? And I'm like, you got to play Nucleum with me. She'd be like, no, I'm not doing it. So but she'll sit down and she'll play Gnome Hollow with me, and like we'll have a blast. And
Sure.
one of the cool things about it is that hard board, you can flip it over and you can play that with, and your kids can play the light board at the same time, and you're having a totally different experience.
It's funny you say that because I wanted to try that. We haven't done it yet, but I said I don't think there's any harm in it. I flipped through the book and I'm like, I don't see anything that says you can't do that. And
You can totally do that.
yeah. Yeah, my kids love the look of the game. They haven't got to play it themselves yet. But you will see in the review that goes up for it when we post it, my younger son did a full cosplay as the cover gnome. And so we have a
That's
little
awesome.
we have a little skit that's going to be in there with that. So that's going to be fun.
Oh, I'm
Um,
excited to see that.
Now it's funny when you're talking about theme, you're talking about uh approachability and stuff like that. I stumbled on something and I wasn't looking for this, and I was like, oh, this is something I wanted to share, and I thought it was interesting. Is I
Sure.
when I pulled up Gnome Hollow on BGG, I was just trying to look for like statistics and just some general things because it's really awesome. It's on the hotness. It's been on the hotness on BGG. One of
Yeah.
the one of the things that I found is, when you go over into the section for mechanisms, right? It
Hmm.
also puts like family and does categories and things like that. So
Yeah.
it's listed in one of the categories there for creatures as gnomes slash dwarves. Okay.
Yeah. I thought that was interesting.
So I thought it was funny that they were grouped together because I think in general, dwarves are more common in, board games and anything RPG adjacent, things like that. And so
Yeah.
I pulled that up and I did it by rank. And if I'm not mistaken, at the time we're doing this, Gnome Hollow is like number 29 of all time. And most of the ones above it are dwarves. And so what that kind of clicked with me, I said, well, I'm obviously Gnome Hollow is going to be climbing because it's very hot. People are loving it. I'm pretty sure soon it will be the highest ranked game about gnomes on
Really? That's
BGG.
crazy. Okay. I didn't know that. That's wild.
Yeah, that was when I saw that, I was like, oh, interesting. Because I was like, okay, I didn't know that they were grouped together, first of all. And then secondly, all of a sudden I'm going through it, even like Saboteur. Like I think 4 or 5 of the ones
Yeah.
above Gnome Hollow are versions of Saboteur, and those aren't gnomes, those are dwarves. So
Yeah.
I thought that was cool because, with a lot of themes, there's normally like the one definitive game people think of, right? Birds,
Yeah.
people will forever think Wingspan, you know,
Always. Forever. Yeah.
always.
No matter what.
It's exactly. And they're all wine. Even though there are a few multiple like really good games about wine, people will think viticulture.
Yeah. They will.
So so I thought it was cool that Gnome Hollow is going to be the definitive gnome game soon enough, if it's not already, really. Which
That's like the first time I've even had this thought. That's crazy.
yeah, I wasn't even thinking it either. And when I pulled that up, I was like, huh, that's interesting. I love how there's statistics and lists for everything. I'm a little list obsessed sometimes, and I thought that was just a really interesting little nugget.
What's funny is I didn't actually put I didn't select all these. I think Board Game Geek selected some of them for me.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's wild. I gnomes weren't my idea. So I since Gnome Hollow started getting some buzz, people have been sending me gnomes, and they've been sending me gnome stickers and like gnomes, like
Hmm.
physical gnomes for my house. My dad bought me a little gnome thing for like in front of my garden in my front yard, and I helped a guy with his book on Kickstarter a few years ago or a year ago, and like he emailed me a gnome that he found, and like the publisher, like they send me pictures of gnomes they see all over the world, and it's funny because like it was my wife's idea. When I needed workers, I said I need some workers, and I was using just cubes.
Sure.
And sorry, my dog is barking,
Who are you
but
talking to here? You're fine. You're fine. I didn't even hear him, but this
oh,
this
you
is
didn't hear him?
no, but this is the pet friendly channel, and believe me, my pets are like our 2 cats and my dog have been moving around here like this whole time. So believe me, you're fine.
Oh yeah, he's up there barking like crazy. I'm sure my wife's like, shh, don't bark. Um, but no, it was her idea. So I had these little cubes and little
Hmm.
triangles, and my wife's like, these should be garden gnomes. Like this is so the initial paintings that I made were meant to look like statue garden gnomes.
Hmm.
And then when the publisher, when I finally signed with the op, we wrote some really cool lore with Manny Vega, and so
Right.
I ended up redesigning the gnomes to fit the new lore that we had written. But the gnomes, I think there's quite a few little gnome games coming out, and at Gen Con for the first time, I don't know if you saw any of the media around that, but there were like these balloon gnomes that they had made for Gnome Hollow.
I did see that.
So a bunch of people started commenting on TikTok saying those aren't gnomes, they're gonks. And I'm like, what the heck is a gonk? Like, so I went and looked it up, and apparently that like in the 1960s, there's been a division between gnomes versus gonks, and gonks don't show their eyes, and gnomes do show their eyes. And I'm like, okay, didn't know about that. And I did
Oh,
a lot of research when I went gnomes, like, and I never saw anything gonk. So I think it's like 5% of the population cares if it's a gonk or a gnome.
wow. That was news to me as well. That's interesting.
Totally random fact.
Well, that's cool. So, speaking of the theme, and you said the lore, I really had fun when I was flipping through the rules and learning it because first of all, it's called the field guide, which I love. I
Yeah.
love those little touches because you know how sometimes a game may be like oversaturated in theme and flavor text when it doesn't need to be, and then
Oh
vice
yeah.
vice versa. Sometimes it's just mechanisms and it's drier than just burnt toast. I when I opened that, I was like, this is exactly the balance that I like because there was lore, there was some flavor text. It's fun for the people who like that and not overbearing for people who don't. It was kind of just that nice even middle, and it was fun. I
Yeah.
loved the illustrations in there and the way it was incorporated, the little stories for the different gnome pairings. That was great.
Yeah, anybody that like loves that stuff, they're gonna read from the beginning to the end, and it tells a story.
Hmm.
And I worked on that with with Manny Vega. He wrote it, and I just gave feedback and some tweaks to fit more of like what I was hoping for. But he did an amazing job, and um, it's been really fun to read and to hear other people read. Like I was on a live stream, and they're like, "Will you just read the lore at the beginning?" And I'm like, "It's a lot." They're like, "We really want to hear you read it." I was like, "Okay, let's do this."
Yeah.
So we read it, and it got a lot of chatter like within the live stream. People were like responding to it, like, "Oh, I love that," and it's so fun, and it sets up. There's some within the lore itself. There's a few key things that really like tie back to me and why I made the game, and so they're subtle, but they're there, and so again, like it feels very much like the game that I intended it to be.
Well, that's great. And I think that that is another thing that kind of shines through with the game is the fact that the theme does fit with the mechanisms. It's not slapped on, painted on because especially with games with tiles, hexes, they're prevalent, right? We have a lot of them, and sometimes it's like,
Sure.
okay, you gotta kind of abstract it in your mind a little bit. But the idea of these little gnome workers going around growing out their gardens, landscaping almost, it works and at the same time, I thought it had, that whimsy and charm. People talk a lot now about the cozy games.
Yeah.
And while I like those themes, I haven't had too many games that while I'm playing them, I actually just feel, like relaxed and it's fun and it's just it's a smooth little ride. And with Gnome Hollow, I felt that. I felt like, you could have a cup of tea, sit down, play it. It's not easy by any means. There's still that challenge, like you said, in people because people can take
Yeah.
it different levels of seriousness, but it still has that cozy nature, and I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah. I was working to retain that. Mostly based off of most of the feedback that I got from the players. So like
Mhm.
when people play test a game that I'm working on, I listen to the feedback. I don't always like apply it, but when I hear like consistent feedback over time, that becomes something where I start asking questions like, what about this, mechanism is essentially like triggering all of this interest, right? Whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
And I explore that. But one of those things that people sometimes forget about is just this really simple rule. And it's where you have to ask permission to place a tile that affects another gnome's ring.
Mm,
And so when I started pitching the game to people, when I started like doing teaches, I started explaining like, look, if you ever lived in a big city, there are these things called like an inner city garden. And in an inner city garden, you're paying for like a flower bed in a larger space.
oh,
And
okay.
that's awesome. So you plant your seeds in your space, but you don't plant your corn in your neighbor's potato patch because that's rude. And so you have to ask, right? If they're not using the whole
Hmm.
thing, you still can't plant there. And so I started explaining things. Well, I had a publisher who was looking at the game after there was a bunch of buzz, and I started getting offers like all over the place because I got 13 offers on the game. And
Wow.
the publisher played it and he called me that night and he goes, "Your game's super broken. Like it doesn't work. Like it's awful." And I was like, "Well, show me what happened. I want to know where it's
Yeah,
broken." And so we hopped on and he showed me because he'd saved it on TTS. He'd saved uh the end state.
sure.
And basically they had left that one rule out and it became like this madness. Like everybody was throwing tiles down to screw up everybody's rings and the game doesn't work.
Hmm.
But with a few tweaks to the rules, you can have like a like super strategic, nasty,
Yeah.
like aggressive little game. And it just didn't feel right. So I sort of ruled out bad play and I ruled in good play.
Hmm. Uh, I'd have to agree with you. I think that maybe people miss that because, just for curiosity, I scrolled through the reviews and comments and stuff for the game as well, and multiple people were like, "Oh, it can be a mean game," and I'm like, I think you might have missed that permission step, and
Yeah,
and at the same time, even if you're not playing with that, I think a lot of games can be mean then if your play group is just going to be like that. It's.
100%.
And it's funny you mentioned that, and I'm going to throw my best friend under the bus. He does some things behind the scenes for us here, and he's going to be in a couple of our videos coming up as well. He was part of our first play of Gnome Hollow, and he was having a bit of a day, and he was spent, right? He wasn't invested, locked in. He was just like, "Oh yeah, I'll just sit and play with you guys." And he kept saying to my wife who was playing with us that he was going to purposely make her rings like bigger and he just make it harder,
Yeah,
like harder to fulfill. And he's like, "Can I do it?" And she's like, "Yeah." And what was interesting about it was she embraced the challenge and
yeah,
she ended up winning despite him
always, every
being.
time.
Yep. And the funny thing about it is I kept saying to him, I was like, "Mike, come on, don't like tank the game. I know your heart's like you're exhausted right now. He had a long day." And I'm like, "But just, give it a try." He still did pretty good with his own scoring.
Yeah,
And I was like, it was interesting to see how that worked out. And I was like, okay, so, if you play by that rule, you're taking chances, if you give people permission and so forth, but it's not going to break the game. It still has a really interesting balance depending on,
yeah.
how you handle the situation.
The reality is this, is that if another person, so there's almost never a time that you don't want to allow someone to play one of their tiles into your ring.
Right.
It just benefits you, like almost exclusively. And so this won't people don't want to hear this, but all board games are math. Like
Yes.
you're basically so Gnome Hollow, you're playing math. The difference is that in my head, I can look at a tile and be like, I know the exact value of that tile. But other people don't do that. They're just like, I know that's a good tile. I want it, but they don't completely understand the intrinsic value of that tile.
Hmm.
Um, but the reality is that every one of those tiles is a plus.
Right.
And every time you don't play one of those into a place that you're building on, it's a negative because it's helping another player. So it's not just like they get a boost, it's you get a loss and they get a boost
Right.
every single time that you play onto another person's ring. And so it it really like I've had people they're like, I'm gonna break your game. I'm like, okay, do it. I
Yeah.
absolutely would welcome you breaking my game because it saves me so much time. Like if a person can break my game, like, oh, please break my games. Like every single person, if you're playing my prototype, please break my game. You save
Right.
me infinite amounts of time. But every time they did it, they lost 100% of the time.
Hmm.
And the harder that they tried to break it, the more they lost.
Yeah.
And it was a really interesting thing. And I think actually in Europe, they're going to like the game even more because Americans love to like mess with people.
Yes.
I don't know what it is about us. It's like, eat that. Like, we love take that. It's why it's called Ameritrash, right?
Right. Right.
My favorite playtest was with a person in Finland, and she's a European, and we started playing the game, and she kept making hearts. Like, all she did was make hearts.
That.
And she loved it. And she was thrilled, and she ended up losing. I said, "You're going to lose." She goes, "No, I'm going to win because I made hearts." And I loved it.
That is great. And I think that's also the other thing that people forget sometimes is we're playing these games to have fun. you know.
Yeah.
I like, for instance, I'm a stickler for the rules, but I'm not going to be obnoxious to someone if they, place a piece down and then in 3 seconds they're like, oh, I wish I moved it over here. Go ahead. At the
Yeah,
end of
go
the day,
for it.
we're there to have, we're there to have fun, right?
Yeah.
And those are some of my favorite moments in gaming in general. Like for all of my favorite games, right? I'll have that most memorable play. And actually that was one of the things I was going to ask you about was like a memorable play of this or play testing. And I always like it when someone has their own little private mission, basically, like that
Yeah.
that woman who wanted to make hearts. It just brings an extra level of fun. It's you could tell that they're enjoying the experience. It's not just I'm here to perform a task and whatever. They're engaged. They're getting out of it what a game is for, right?
That's exactly right. Like, so what a game is, and this is an interesting thing to talk about. A game is an engineered experience.
Mhm.
So everything that a person's experiencing is something that like I've essentially like in my head designed for a person to have. And that doesn't mean they're going to have it. Like if they choose not to like embrace the rule system or whatever, like they can have a really bad experience.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a decision people make. I had a really interesting play test, and it made me start wondering if I could like rule in this system. But there was a couple that sat down with two single people, and the couple, it was interesting because she said to her husband about two turns in, the tile that she really needed came up. She goes, "If you will put that there, I will give you anything you want on your turn." And so they began helping each other every single turn because they didn't know if the right tiles would come up on their turn. And so like they would even like dedicate like their flowers to help their partner. And it was like one of the coolest play tests I've ever experienced
Mm.
because two people played it just so differently. And I think that's one of the reasons we play test games because like you need to hit like a huge demographic to see how people play it.
Yep.
Europeans play different than Americans, and like Australians play differently than all of those. Like it's just everybody's different. And Germans play different than everybody
Yep.
because they're just totally different. And so trying to build a game that can hit everybody is really, really hard.
Right.
Um, but yeah, there's an experience for you.
That's great. I love that. Yeah, and I love when people take those unique approaches to games and sometimes even if it's like I said, not 100% by the rule, what have you. Um
Yeah.
Recently I had what I'm considering my favorite play of Thunder Road Vendetta ever. Because a friend of mine and my wife created an alliance and managed to cross the finish
Yes.
line at the same time. So I was like,
That's
it was
crazy.
the only co-op win in it that I've ever seen. But their shared goal was to like defeat the other players by a certain part in the road, and they managed to do it. And it was goofy and silly. And I'm like, no, this is why we play games. This was a blast. So I love hearing
Yeah.
one last thing to maybe wrap things up. I couldn't go through this without mentioning the production and how the op has put together just an amazing production for the game. When I opened it and I just saw even the tray inside and the component holders and everything, look, it's
Yeah.
great. And the elephant in the room of the magnetic boards is just that's just wonderful. I
Isn't it
think
awesome?
my joke was the first time I heard that I said, listen, I'm not being that person, but it's going to get a 1 point bump from me just for that. It doesn't matter. I love that.
It's a it's so different. Like, and
Mhm.
it feels different. And actually, I think some people are struggling with it. They're like, but I miss my big, thick, chunky two dual layer board.
It's one of those things. Like I do like a dual layer board, but at the end of the day, the fact that this has not flawed once, like there's no, it's just so smooth. Um, I know everybody's going to be doing it. I know there have been magnets in games before. I'm not trying to say it like that, but just the fact that
Yeah.
the way it looks and just how simple and smooth it is, I love that it's kind of a hallmark of it, and people are praising it for that. It definitely deserves that.
Oh, thank you. It was actually in my original prototype, and they kept it. I developed them on accident because I was trying to shoot some videos and my little plastic pieces were skittering all over. So
Sure.
I 3D printed a board, I put magnets in it, I glued my art on
Yeah.
top, and then click, it went right where I wanted. And so, um, publishers asked me if I wanted it in the game, and I said it was their decision. Like it wasn't a mandatory. and I
Hmm.
was really glad that the op decided to keep it because I think it's going to get a lot of people excited, and I think we're going to see a lot of games come out um, with magnetic boards in the future because
Yeah.
of it. I know magnets have been used here and there in little ways, but like this is like such a specific use.
Yeah, I think people are going to get spoiled with it. To be honest, it's going to be like, oh, this is so nice.
I know.
You know what my wife has kept saying, and so I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't say this because she's mentioned it so many times. She's gonna crack up that I'm saying this, but she was like, you know what I want after playing this? She's like, I just wish there was a giant board or mat underneath so all of the hexes were magnetic. And you know how sometimes with a hex game where you hit the table a little and they all shuffle,
And
right?
yeah, they move.
They move a little, or someone trying to place one, and with my fat fingers, I'm trying to get it in there. And she's like, imagine if that was magnetic too. And I'm like, listen, that's a that's a dream right there, right?
That's a $250 game.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Exactly. Thank you for doing this and be talking about your game because it was great for us. We've been really enjoying it, and I think it's well deserved all the praise that it's been getting because it's that great blend of the mechanisms with a really fun theme with really good components. And I think a lot of times a game will be lacking a little in one of those, and so the fact that I
sure.
think Gnome Hollow is just like smooth as butter in all three is great, and it's bringing a lot of joy to people's game tables.
I think this is a home run for the op. They're getting like a tremendous amount of positive feedback.
Yeah.
And I think what we'll see too is like, we're gonna see this become it's gonna definitely find its home. And
Hmm.
we're finding that. Like I went to a bar the other night and we put 5 copies out on tables and we just played it. And people sat down and every table was full the whole night. And like um there was a Barnes and Noble nearby, 7 minutes away, and everybody ran to Barnes and they
Hmm.
bought every copy that Barnes had.
Isn't it the game of
And
the
they were
month?
bringing them back for me to sign. It is the game of the month.
That's great.
And they they were like, this is one of my favorite games I've ever played. I love this so much. They all went home with them and I signed them and again, those aren't the people writing it on BGG, but those are
No.
just really normal gamers that are just having a great time. So
Well, then that must be a heartwarming experience. That's great, man. That's awesome.
somebody asked me to sign the side of their head. That was crazy. I've never signed a person before, but on Monday night I signed a guy's head like right there. Like it was crazy.
Talk about making memories, right?
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again for doing this. Thanks for being Board Game Animal's first interview
Dude,
in the board game hobby.
always,
Yeah, that's great.
whenever.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely have to reconnect for an expansion down the road. That would be great. Great. Thanks so much, man, for this. Really, I appreciate it a lot. All right,
Cool.
man. Have a great night.
Thanks, Justin.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
How was that, folks? A board game animal first. Our first interview with a creative in the hobby. I hope you enjoyed it. Big thanks to Ammon for taking the time to do that, and a big thanks to the op for continually supporting us and providing us with a review copy of Gnome Hollow. Let us know what you thought of Gnome Hollow if you've played it, what you thought of the interview, or if you had any questions, you can leave them down below. Thank you for liking and subscribing, and I'll let Ammon say this part.
Don't forget to play board games like an animal.